Welcome, everybody. Welcome to this call with Nora Bateson. This is our last session of the Thought Leadership for Systems Transformation program. I personally am very much looking forward to this particular one. We saved Nora until the end of the program on purpose. And I just can't wait to hear what comes today. So just the process, Nora will share some reflections on the collective narrative. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll have a Q&A section at the end, okay? And with this, Nora, it's all yours now, please.
Okay. So I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to make a direct response to the response. And that's part of the response. Okay, so what I'd like to do is to have you think about what was in that, document how your thing went, and to let yourself, your body, your mind, your memories, your intellect, in particular, the rigor of your exploration, make the connections. And we were just before some of you came on, we were just talking about midsummer. And one of the things about midsummer in Sweden is that I'm not Swedish. And so there's the food. And I just returned from a 3-day session in Switzerland with a group of people from around the world and working with regenerative farming and various forms of government and so on and so forth on the food crises that come, that we're in, etc. And what I'd like to do is to just start from the question of what is food? And reflecting on the meal that I just had with my family today. There is a real difference between food and the meal. The meal is the culture, is the history, is the conversation, is the intergenerational expectation, right? Is me, the American stepmom, trying to figure out how to put the right amount of wild strawberries on the cake and the wildflowers on the table in honor of this tradition, which is not just about what we eat, it's about the message of how I want to be there for my family here, the willingness and the curiosity, the joy and the beauty that I'm coming into the relationship with. So we get the fresh potatoes and we scrub them clean and we boil them and we make the cheese pie and we have my husband has got the herrings and the youngest stepson says, I'm not eating fish. I watched Seaspiracy. I'm not eating any more fish. I said, I know what you mean. And the family's gathering and the schnapps are getting poured in the little itty bitty glasses and the songs are being sung. And it isn't about the fish. Food is not just nutrients. It's not just what comes from the farm. It's history. It's what is happening on the table. It's what's in the meal. It's the fact that if you look around and you see how much salt and fat and sugar everyone's eating and you want to shake your finger and scold them and say, you shouldn't do that. This is an addiction, that the trauma itself that people have been living through in their lives is creating an appetite for sugar and salt and fat. So where's the addiction? Where's the food? Where's the issue? If you want to address the world's food issues, what do you do? Do you tell people around the world what they should and shouldn't eat? Do you create a a model for what the perfect farming, sustainable lifestyle is, and then stamp it into each community? Because while my stepson may be over eating fish, let me tell you what, the rest of this country is not ready to let go of herring on midsummer. Seaspiracy or no seaspiracy. This is part of a ceremony. It's part of the linking. It's part of the recipes that grandmothers passed down. Where's the food? Where's the change? So one of the mistakes that I see happening is that in the urgency for change in this moment, that urgency beckons a kind of mechanistic thinking. And the mechanistic thinking is sneaky and seductive. The mechanistic thinking climbs in there and says to you, you have to change this, and this needs to be different, and that needs to be different. But the change isn't really in the parts. And this is the mistake that keeps getting made. Some of you may know we've been having this conversation about food security, about sustainability, about social equality, about racial equality, about economic equality. We've been having these conversations for decades. You can't fix the economy with the economy. You can't fix the education system inside the education system. You can't fix the food system inside the food system. So where is the change? Where is the work? We're eager to roll up our sleeves and go to work. Where's the work? What can we do? So what warm data and the warm data work does is it is asking the question, not how do we fix it, but whatever that it is, let's call it food, let's call it education systems, let's call it whatever it is, to ask, how is this system learning to be in its world? All right, this is a significantly different question. How do systems learn? How do systems learn? Now, if you put this in your own body, in your own experience, and I were to say to you, okay, so how do you learn to play violin? Where's the learning? Is it in your muscles? Is it in the history and the making of the instrument? Is it in the music? Is it in the emotional connection to those sounds? Is it in the history of that music? Is it in the relationship with the teacher? Is it intellectual? Where's the learning? How do systems learn? And what I think you're probably looking at right now is that in that example, it's the way that my muscles are expressing my emotions that are part of the history and the ideas that I have lived within, that are coming through my body, and that I have worked hard with my intellect, that then again is touching that incredible craft of the instrument itself. Where's the learning? The learning is this fantastic, reflective, calibrative, responsive, shifting process between all of those things, plus more. Okay, so how am I going to draw that? How am I going to make a model of that? How am I going to control that, manage that, actionize that? Where's the learning? How do systems learn? So I think that we're making a big mistake trying to create systems change. I'm just going to say that flat out. The issue is not actually about systems change. What we're looking at is a different order of question, which is, how do we participate in the way all these different aspects of the systems that we are within are in relationship and responding to each other. Okay, this is deep stuff. So it may sound like I am a poet and that I'm interested in the poetry of systems, but I want to actually come back to that with a little bit of urgency and say, the problem with prose is that they end. It's flat, right? And what we do not want is a flat response, because the world we're living in is not flat. The learning that we're taking part in is not flat. If you have a project, that project is going to have delineated edges. Those delineated edges are first of all, they're an illusion, because whatever is taking place is going to actually create more shifting. I was working with an artist this weekend who had done some incredible work with light. And you may have seen this project, the Water Light Project. Has anyone seen this Water Light Project? And it was something that was done in the Netherlands. And it was this cool light exhibition that was an experience of what Amsterdam would feel like if they just let the waters rise. And it was I mean, first of all, it was mesmerizing and beautiful, but it was also spooky, and it touched people. Then he showed another project that he did, because of course we were at a food conference. And this one produced light on a crop in the dark. And it put blue, it's called Grow, you can look it up. And it puts blue and red lights on a crop. And one of the things that's interesting about these blue and red lights is they start to actually activate the plants in new ways. Plus, it's beautiful. I mean, it's spectacular in a world where you can't shoot fireworks anymore. Okay. Now, these two art projects are very, very different. I was in the room, and the first one, everyone was like, ooh. And the second one, the response from the room was, how much does it cost to do this? How do I get these lamps on my garden? How much does it cost? So afterward, I asked the artist, because I noticed that this second, the Grow project, which looks like the more actionized project, I asked him, let's go back to that first one with the water light. Tell me what kind of responses you got. And he got so excited. And he said, I have hundreds of slides. People from all over the world came, and they all responded in different ways. Some people dressed up as mermaids. Other people came and they started building sandbags into the light. Other people came and there was hundreds of different responses. And the responses, the mermaids started to play with the sandbags, and right, so it unleashed this side-by-side shift in the relational process of what was being perceived. Now, I would say that most of the problems that we're dealing with right now in the world could be described as being insidious. Okay, in English, this word insidious is a fantastic word. And what it means is that there are lots of things that have come together and in unseen ways have gradually produced a very dangerous outcome. That's what insidious means. Cancer is insidious. Consumerism is insidious. Racism is insidious. Capitalism is insidious. Corruption is insidious. Greed is insidious. Sexism is insidious. So the thing about insidious issues is that you cannot come in and solve the consequence. The production of a solution to solve the consequence of an insidious problem is what Bertrand Russell and Whitehead would have called an error of logical typing, right? You're at the wrong level. You went to the restaurant and you ate the menu instead of the food, right? You made an error of logical typing. You mistook the map for the territory. Most of the solutions that we are working with right now are at that level. While the deeper processes, the implicit understandings, the things that don't get questioned, that will reproduce themselves again and again and again and again, continue. So that you get, for example, at this food conference that I was just at, fantastic people, really great intention. But they're trying to fix food. And they have misunderstood completely the meal. There are things you won't see if you look at the meal. You could count the nutrients. Go ahead. You can count the calories. Have fun. You can look at the various cultural recipes and identify them. Great. But you won't see. It's like if I asked you, maybe there's a ballet student in this mix. If I asked you to do a triple pirouette, you might have seen one before and you could jump up and try to do that, but you don't have it in you. You haven't experienced you haven't experienced in a muscular, emotional way, intellectual, how to do that pirouette. So what the warm data processes do is they are a way into those issues, those territories, which produce implicit epistemological traps. Implicit. Okay, so we're working with what is implicit here. Because if you want to make change, that's where you got to go. That's where the big stuff is. From there, the other stuff starts to unfold. Okay, now I just want to say that there are people who understand this. There are people who are working like this. Unfortunately, I don't know if their hearts are really wrapped around the possibilities of their fellow humans and other species. But when the Mercer, Fox, Steve Bannon crew got together and started working with Cambridge Analytica and aggregate IQ, what they did is they went into the warm data territory and they went in manipulating. They went in and they shifted the implicit territory. Okay. The left is like, we have to change policy. Those guys were like, if you want to change policy, you got to change culture. You can't change policy until you change culture. So they went in and they changed culture and they did it fast. And pretty soon people, if they had come in, imagine if 10 years ago, 15, let's say 11 years ago, imagine people came into the EU and into the United States and said, what we want you to do is vote for, you have to vote for the fact that you won't be able to travel or work in the EU anymore, and that you won't be able to trade, and that we want you to take away your rights. People would have been furious. Now, I recognize it's more complex than that. But I also want to say that what they did has a name. It's called stochastic terrorism. Stochastic is a beautiful word, comes from math, and what it means is almost random. Okay? When you look at how nature continues, it's there's order, but there's chaos. Right? It's stochastic. It's like when you pull an arrow and it's gonna fly in a straight line, kinda, but the wind is blowing and there's obstacles and there's this and there's that. It's stochastic. It's like when you start an art project and you think you know where you're going, but then the thing becomes another thing and it grows and it's alive. It changes. Okay, warm data is stochastic information. It shifts. It's alive. How do we study a world of living systems if the information we're using is dead? So it may be uncomfortable to work with information that's alive because it won't sit flat. It won't be controlled. It won't be managed. But the alternative is actually a disaster. So stochastic terrorism is the idea that they're going to do all this stuff and they're going to put these ideas out and they're going to create a way for these ideas to be in relationship to other ideas. This is the piece. They did not go out there seeding with direct propaganda. They went out there and they made things that would be in relationship to each other. And just like I asked you to make a bridge between your response and my response to your response, what they did was indirect. And that indirectness hit down into the implicit. The idea was that they didn't know what was going to happen or who was going to react, but they knew people would and that it would. And they didn't care where, and they weren't counting, and they didn't have an impact report, and they didn't have a KPI, and they didn't have any measurements whatsoever. They poured a ton of money into shifting the pH of the culture so that something polarizing would grow. And they did it. And meanwhile, everyone was like, but we have to change the policy. Hello? Communication is not communication. Communication is not what you say. It's not what you didn't say. Communication is what it was possible to say. And what they did is they changed what it was possible to say. And that's a very different order of change. It's a very different order. So I guess what I would like to say is that what we're working on in the warm data world is that we have a lot of things that I would love to share with you, but I won't. And a brand new piece of theory for any warm data hosts that are in this group, July 7th. Be sure you tune in the warm data zone because we have a new piece of theory that's coming out. And that new theory is about, it's about the question, what's the opposite of insidious? What's the opposite of insidious? How is it that life actually comes together in unseen ways to produce vitality? So that to me is the question. The opposite of stochastic terrorism is to stochastic vitality, stochastic care. We don't know where people will show this care. We don't know how it will come out. All right, with the warm data work, you have no idea what will happen because it doesn't happen in the warm data session. It happens afterwards. It happens in the way people are with their kids, in the way they see their next project, in the way they write their next piece, in the way they make love to their partner, right? Because if you're talking systems change, where's the change? right? It's in the relationship between all of those ways of being. So this is not a professional zone. It's not a personal zone. It's not a cultural zone or a history zone or an economic zone or an education zone or a health zone. It's the way in which all of those processes reflect and describe, okay, check that out. The way in which all of those processes describe each other. They describe each other. So you want to fix the education system. But the education system is not the education system. The education system is a description of the culture. It's a description of intergenerational expectations in a culture. It's a historical exploration of those relationships in a culture. The education system is a description of our economy. It's a description of politics and law. It's a description of the implicit understandings that we are imprinting upon the next generation. So if you want to change the education system, what do you change? Where do you go? So what we're doing is this guy from the UN the other day said this fantastic thing. We've been doing this piece. I think we did, 70 or 80 different sessions with 800 or 900 people in the last month. And it was in conjunction with the UNDP's. Were you involved with this, Fyodor, at all? The Zero Step? The UNDP Energy Project, Renewable Energy Project. And as you may know, 2030 is coming up, and what they had to actually acknowledge is that they have achieved not quite 6% of where they need to get to by 2030. So it's people ask me, how do you get people interested in warm data? And I don't have to. They come to me when they realize that the projects that they're doing don't work. And at that point, they're ready. I'm not here to sell warm data. We don't advertise. This is not a flashy thing. It's underground. It's all relational. But when people get desperate, they turn up. It was fascinating because this guy at the UN said, well, clearly what we need to do is we need to make some time for it to look like nothing's happening so that everything can happen. Because when you're working with the system, you don't change one piece at a time. You're working with the relational process between them. And that process is actually, it's tricky. It's tricky because what it doesn't mean is that you set up 17 different committees. Then you're going to end up fixing the freaking parts again. And you are the education system. You are the health system. You are the economy. You are the history. You are that liminal space. You are, I am, we are. The way we are talking to each other right now, the expectations we have of each other, the judgments we pass on each other, the way we describe each other is holding the existing established systems in place. Our relationships right here, right now, hold those trajectories. So the challenge is how to not say the things we've said before, how to not work in the way we've worked before, how to actually go beyond the ideas we've been stuck in and down into a deeper territory. Okay, I'm going to stop there and let you guys ask me questions and see where it goes from there.
So let's start with Bobby, then go to Klaus. Bobby, would you like to ask a question?
Well, I was just responding to where you alluded to the phrase systems learn versus the phrasing of systems change, and thinking that there are all of these ways in which it's self-determination theory, giving people autonomy, giving them agency individually or collectively, is then expressed through systems change. And so the what I see here is what I was writing was that you were critical of the phrase systems change, but I was trying to understand better that, because as a social innovation community, reaching the scale of systems change or the scope of systems change might be how, if we get to harness all the tacit knowledge or all of the contextual variables, and I alluded to these processes accordingly, then we could do that plausibly. But happy to try to understand better.
Yep. Okay. Here's the thing. Oh boy, this is okay. Let's find the paradox here. Okay, we have a paradox. Agency is a paradox. And it's really important to hold that paradox in your line of sight. It is not just an is, okay? And the paradox looks like this. I'm me, I'm unique, you're you, you're unique. The way your life has come together, your language, your family, your economy, your dreams, your heartbreaks, your wounds, your everything that makes you you, and it makes you be able to see this glass of water or the food system or whatever it is in the way that you particularly would see it, and your particularness is possible. Right? We're all different, and that is one piece of this. And that's true. Okay. But then when you ask yourself, which one of those processes is mine? Where did that come from? Where can I claim that part of me that is me? And what you start to realize is that your language, your education, your heartbreak, your family, your experience, all of those things that are producing this you-ness down to your DNA, your history, your whatever, are coming from your contexts. You're not you. You're your contexts. So when you decide, I think what we need to do is we need to actually put, all of our money into vertical agriculture and vegetable-based meat. Right? And there's this perception. This is what we need to do. We got to do this thing. What is necessary at that moment is the epistemological check-in. Recognize the paradox, right? Wait a second. I am an expression of these contexts that I live within. I am an expression of the way in which the existing system wants to continue. In what way are those things that might perceive at first to look so clean actually a perpetuation of the existing systems? So the paradox of agency is really important, because what it does is I really invite you to sit with it and be uncomfortable, because that agency, I'm not suggesting that people do nothing and that they kick back and be like, yeah, society made me do it. Not my fault. I have no responsibility. Or it's all my fault. I can change the world. I am the one. Here we go. Right? Either of those modalities are a disaster. But the tension between them is good. Harari wrote this great piece about free will, and I think he actually ripped it off from Buddhism. But the concept is that if you think you have free will, you have none at all, because you have been fooled into thinking that the choices you're making are actual choices. They are instead those things that have been gathered around you by the existing systems. Those are not choices, right? Those are what have been placed there by the existing contexts. So if you think you have free will, you don't. And the second you realize you have no free will, you get a little bit. The second you realize that you're in this relationship with the contextual processes that you are a part of, at that moment, you're able to see in two zones. And that type of perception generates another kind of integrity that's much less susceptible to colonial habits, by the way. There's a whole lot of save the world stuff going on out there that is super colonial. And so that's part of it. Another part of it is that when you are walking down the street and you don't see that you're about to step in dog poop, you're liable to step in it. If you're walking down the street and you see that dog poop, you don't have to give yourself a lot of information. Hello, remember not to step in the dog poop, right? You don't need a memo. It's not a matter of taking responsibility for not stepping in the dog poop. If your perception is there and you can perceive those relational processes that are in systemic learning, the way that you come into a project is totally different. The way you come into your family is totally different. The way you are walking through the woods is totally different. So what I am after is a total shift in approach. And I guess I'm done being shy about that. Yeah. I hope, does that make any sense, Bobby? Are you hearing, does that ring anything for you?
No, I hear the ambiguity of agency, that we don't have as much agency as we wish to have. We don't have as much agency as we hope we'd have. But it doesn't mean that there's not autonomy and collaboration, right? I mean, that's what we should be aiming at, is more cooperation to demystify this altogether. I mean, where I've been inspired by your work has partially been where these cooperation moments have happened. And so I feel like that those are moments of collective agency. It's not about the individual provenance of my credit for changing the world. I'm saying the collective provenance of any of these changes that matter to us as narrative. I think that's what I was aiming at.
Yeah, okay, that's great, because I really want to be with that before we go carrying on for just a second, because this let's drop in to the notion of collaboration. And let's think about if we right now on Zoom, we're all going to sing happy birthday. All right. We all know the happy birthday song, I'm assuming. And if we try to sing it, I think what you'll know if you've tried to sing on Zoom, okay, we could try it. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, dear everybody. Happy birthday to you.
All right. So what happened there? We took something known that we tried to do collaboratively in a world in which there was an asynchronous shifting process. And what happened? All right, now let's try another thing. And let's try to improvise, okay? So I don't know how you are at improvisation, but we'll just give this a try. And let's create like 30-second birthday poem, okay? That is sort of musical, okay? I'll start, and then if you feel it, you pop in, okay? If you don't feel it, hold back. Pay attention to the way you come in and go out, all right? Birthday, birthday.
Candles. Oh, I need some presents, I love presents.
King of the world today, I can't wait.
Ding-a-ling, 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 ding-a-ling. So in this exercise, what you just saw was that when we are in improvisation, or whatever you want to call that, the way that collaboration happens is very, very different. We don't know where we're going together. Okay? In the first one, we tried to collaborate knowing where we were going together. It's fantastic. In this moment, we don't know where we're going together. How do systems learn? This is coming right back to how do systems learn. So the mutual learning happens by not knowing together where we're going, not by setting a goal and trying to collaborate to get there. Do you see the difference? So there is agency, but my agency in that collaboration birthday moment is completely in response to you. It's only in relationship. It has everything to do with who I am and where I am and my essence and everything I can give. But it's only possible what it's possible to say, okay? What you say changes what it's possible to say. The ecology of the communication is changed by the notes you bring in.
Beautiful.
And there's the warm data right there.
Yeah, I think it actually could be a good segue to Klaus's question, because it is about the unifying story. So, right, Klaus?
Yeah. So your thoughts are very, very aligned and compatible with Yuval Harari, who argues that story is the unifying clue that forms our reality. So looking at this as a high-level, meta-level entry point, we need some sort of a unifying or stochastic story that resonates across the society and informs and guides behavior. But in the US, for example, there are 17 million children who are food insecure and depend on basically government handouts, food stamps, and so on to get their basic nutrition. Millions of children are nutrient deficient and their development is stunted because of the type of food we serve them. On the other hand, you have people who buy organic foods, they seek innovative products, they look at food as entertainment, as culture, and all of those things. But at least here in the United States, an astonishing millions of people don't participate in that economy. So how can we create this unifying story that resonates on all levels and across the economic spectrum to explain the link between the food we eat, to our own health, and to nature herself? So a story guides the system, because story forms our reality, the way and you cited several examples about the dog poop and all these other things where we have intuitive responses to the phenomena around us. How do we get to this story, and how can we accelerate the development of that story to compete with a Steve Bannon and all these nefarious characters who are distorting story and distorting human behavior in the process?
The opposite of the Steve Bannon approach is absolutely not Cambridge Analytica for good. Absolutely not. The second you start manipulating the story, you are no better than them. Because in that is the perpetuation. The story has to be wild. You want to rewild the world, rewild the stories. And that means that they're going to have the trauma in them. They're going to carry the weight of remorse, and the way that remorse shifts to learning, and the way that learning shifts to care. But you don't get to make that arc. That story arc is not mine. It's not yours. And the way that learning takes place is absolutely 100% completely different inside each person. That's what I learned in the last couple of years doing warm data, that the way in which I found complexity in my stories of my life that allowed me to make relationship to your stories, that process is totally, completely stochastic and unique. And the way in which it changes it's as stochastic and unique. So I think the idea of having any kind of top-down thing that gets inserted is right away dangerous, because we don't know, right? If I come in and I say to someone, you shouldn't be eating that sugar, but the trauma that they're coming out of, and that we're living in a really broken world. People are really hurting. They're stressed. They're wildly, there is a jungle of pain, an ecology of pain. I can't tell people not to eat that sugar or smoke those cigarettes or do those opiates right now. And if I do, what I'm going to get is polarity. I'm going to get pushback. And it's going to unfurl all sorts of double binds that produce all sorts of other confusion. So I think that if there's a unifying story, that you got it right. It's stochastic. It's rewilding. I don't know if you're familiar with permaculture, but one of the things that's so important in the permaculture work is actually to work with the soil. That you don't tend the garden or the farm to get the vegetables. You tend the farm to produce the soil that will produce the vegetables. So you don't deplete that soil. Think of the warm data space as a way of doing that at a social level, a personal and social level. So the stories that we make, one of the things that people say in the warm data space is people are telling stories and they're talking to each other. And this is the one right here. This is it. Your story changed my story. I was going to tell this story, and then you told your story, and I changed the way I was going to tell my story. I changed the story I was going to tell. You want to know what systems learning looks like? That's what it looks like. Your story changed my story. And that's an ecology. So I think if we think of story as a kind of atmosphere, instead of as a thing, but as an atmosphere, and how different organisms are participating in the ecology of that atmosphere, then you start to ask a different question, which is not what's the story, but how do we tend to the story? What can I bring into that atmosphere that will shift the tone, hold the aesthetic, make it possible for your story to be warmer? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I was thinking in terms of Donnelly Meadows, intervening in the system, leverage points of a system, which really is sort of an inverted pyramid, which starts with a root narrative, which then gets translated across this pyramid in ways that it becomes contextual and explicit at every level of the economy. So we are lacking, root story. We are lacking an explanation of reality, the science and evidence-based. All the things that you just explained about agriculture. I'm actually working on that. What does that mean to the food and beverage director in a hotel? What does that mean to the buyer for a catering organization? What does this mean to a housewife who buys food for her children? So how does that story roll through this inverted pyramid, up the pyramid, so that it resonates and contextualizes and makes sense? That's sort of where I was going.
Yeah, and how to I mean, I'm just worried that if we come in thinking we're looking for a story to unify, that's going to turn into colonialism really quickly. The danger of manipulation there is phenomenal. So what I'm really interested in is the way that each story is able to provide new learning for every other story, and that becomes collective perception. That becomes, right? It's the difference between those two birthday things we just did. One of them was working with something known, and it was a disaster. Here's our goal. This is what we want. Let's make it happen. Right? And this is the way our world is working. So this exploration of, I don't know, for example, I have no idea what will happen after this session. Maybe you'll be like, man, that Bateson girl is out of her clock. She is totally round the bend. Or maybe you'll think that, and then in 6 months, someone will do something and you'll be like, this is actually ringing a bell. Or maybe, I don't know what will happen. So all I can do is actually come from and give from a place of another kind of integrity. And I have to say that I have really discovered that integrity through the warm data work. And I invite you to come participate and see what happens there. I think that would be great. And I don't know about, I love Donella Meadows' work, but I don't know about these leverage points anymore. I'm really starting to question, not because I think there's no leverage points, but because the way of thinking about things as leverage points becomes a perpetuation of a mechanistic way through. And I think you might be better off coming in with that notion of ecology of communication. What can I put in this that allows my story? How is my story changing? Just follow the life of it. Yeah. And it's urgent. It's so urgent.
I think we might have time for one or two more questions. And if Maria, you could go, and then we see if we could get one more question. So Maria?
Okay. So drawing on this idea of an ecology of communication, I wanted to turn to bring it to psychological stuckness. I was riveted by something that you shared in the third session with the STOA audience about a group of participants, one of whom said, struggling with mental illness, one of whom said, we were drowning in the warm data. And I've been thinking of, the experience, the lived experience of psychological stuckness as drowning in the warm data. And I've been thinking about, what creates stuckness in psychological life and what creates flow, what restores flow in psychological life. I've been thinking about internal family systems therapy as a kind of a model in which it's like starting conversations with the multiple perspectives inside your psychological ecology, inviting them into conversation with no other goal than to be in conversation and to allow something to emerge from that. Anyway, so that's my question is, any thoughts you'd like to share about, is there a kind of stochastic authoritarianism that creates stuckness inside our psychological lived experience, where it's like there's like a governing perspective that's shutting down others? And is there a way to release and create flow?
Yeah, it's a funny thing about stuckness is that when you're looking at a living system, you can only actually have stuckness if you make a tight enough circle around the system you're looking at that you don't see the change and the wild compensatory processes that are taking place in order to keep the stuck thing stuck.
Mm.
So there really is no such thing as a stuck system. That's the first piece that was a big unlock for me. So then I started to realize that what is happening is that it's the relationship between the part of the system that those aspects in the system that are locking and producing all this compensatory chaos, right? The things you can't say in a marriage, for example, produce all kinds of chaos around the edges. Right. And you could look at the thing you're not saying as a stuckness, or you could look at the compensatory part and go, woohoo, this is the wild zone. But what's the relationship? And that's where I would say what you're looking for. I think flow is an interesting word. I think I would think about it as, first of all, as mutual learning. Where's the mutual learning in the system? That things get stuck in because they're learned in a way. And so you ask that question, how is this person learning to be in their world? And that's going to push out lots of different contextual relationships into your view. How is this person learning to be in this world? In what way does this stuckness actually make sense? Right? In what way is this stuckness an expression, a description of the other relationships and the limits that are within them? So that when you ask, how are they learning to be in their world? The thing is that we are learning is not necessarily a good thing. You can learn to be violent, learn to hold back, learn to be dishonest, learn to be, right? Or you can bring new learning to that. And I think that learning is best approached. Again, it's implicit. But what makes implicit understanding? Implicit understanding is generated transcontextually. So what are those contexts? And instead of thinking about, the story of the blind mice that go and they check out the elephant and one comes back and says, they found the rope. It's at the tail. It's a rope. Oh, they found the trunk. Oh, it's a snake. You know this story, right? And that story becomes a story about multiple perspectives. And I want to warn you about multiple perspectives. That's not enough. If you got to have it, but it's not enough. What's interesting about that story is the next piece, which is what's the relationship between the mice? What was it possible for them to communicate with each other about what they saw or experienced? So when we're looking at these transcontextual stucknesses, it's easy to get lost in the different, this is the father, this is the relationship to the father, this is and forget to look at the warm data between them. So working with mental health and especially with trauma with warm data, one of the things that happens very quickly, it's remarkable how quick it happens, is that people respond by saying, I just realized that the trauma that I was holding is not my own. It's a trauma that's in the system. It's a trauma that is contextualized in multiple ways. And the second that trauma stops being my trauma and starts being a living system within the system that we're living within, it shifts. And what it's possible to do from there, have a healing that can take place from there, the different kinds of communication. I don't know how it works. I can't claim to. And if I did, you would need to fire me because I would be a hypocrite. That territory is not for me to know. It's something happening below the level of perception, or below the level of conscious perception. But allowing that transcontextual exploration to take place, it just makes it possible. Where did he go? Klaus's question about story. The story changes. And I think what I'm more interested in than a story is multiple stories shifting, changing. Yeah. And so we have a whole group that's working with trauma and care. And it's actually called the Not Trauma group, because what we started to realize was that it became very difficult to figure out what is the trauma actually, because it wasn't a thing. It was more like a wave that was coming through people. Anyway, very, very interesting research happening there. Yeah.
I think we now only have time for closing remarks. And this is about what do you want to leave us with, something you want to highlight, and any announcements you might have.
I guess I just, I think the thing that I want to leave you with is a kind of humor and play and rigor of what happens when you look at yourself and the world around you, the people around you, and you start to ask the question, am I perceiving me or them? Or am I just perceiving my own idea of them? And that, there's a lot of room there for a really rigorous work. And that work is full of love and humor. It's full of rage. It's full of art. It's full of, day-to-day grind. I don't shy away from hard work. I don't shy away from the complexity. What I have found again and again and again is that it's a lot better to take the time, a few moments, to be able to dive into the deeper relational processes and respond more like that second improvisational thing we did. Watching out for the mechanistic metaphor that's just lurking. It's seducing you, it's hiding. And it's tricky as hell, right? It's tricky as hell. Most of the change is needing to really be dealt with in ways that right now, as we're coming out of the pandemic, people have changed. The world has changed. And you know what? We don't know how we've changed. And we don't know how the world's changed. And we don't actually know. It's like we're all little puzzle pieces that got put in different boxes for 18 months and we all changed shape. And now we don't even know what puzzle we're in anymore. So as you're entering back into the world around you, watch out for those scripts you've already used. If you find you're saying the thing you've said before, don't say it. Take a look at what is this script? What does this script fit into? It's a great moment to actually go deeper, to stop asking about food and start looking at the meal. Like this farmer who was there from Iowa, and he said, whatever you want, I'll grow for you. And there it is.